We might be a small island, but we've got a big history. Everywhere you stand, there are worlds beneath your feet. And so every year, hundreds of archaeologists across Britain go looking for more clues into our story. Who lived here, when and how.
So there's a blade here, here, so he's being attacked from all angles.
Archaeology is a complex jigsaw puzzle, drawing everything together from skeletons to swords, temples to treasure.
He's biting his shield.
Biting his shield, yeah.
From Orkney to Devon, we're joining this year's quest on sea, land and air. We share all of the questions and find some of the answers as we join the teams in the field, digging for Britain. We know that the Romans invaded and occupied our land for nearly 4 centuries, covering it with roads and cities. But this year, archaeologists are uncovering surprising new evidence which challenges our preconceptions and offers us a fresh perspective on Roman Britain, revealing a vanished landscape. Even today, astonishing finds are still emerging from the soil, bringing us face to face with the people of Britannia. A newly discovered town in rural Devon turns history on its head. The mystery of the 97 dead babies thickens. And the Roman god buried for 1,700 years beneath a fort. The Roman military occupation probably began on the southeast corner of England, where the Romans are thought to have first landed. In the story of Roman Britain, the mighty legions are famed, while its fleet, the Classis Britannica, is practically unknown. For nearly 4 centuries, though, hundreds of wooden ships, all long vanished, patrolled the channel. But I'm on my way to a dig that I'm hoping will take me straight to the control room of Britain's first major navy, bringing me closer to the man who ruled Britannia's waves. There's been a suggestion of a connection between the Roman navy and a very particular site up here on the cliffs at Folkestone. So this year, archaeologists are excavating that site, hoping to uncover new evidence and test that possible connection. On the edge of these cliffs, volunteers are helping to unearth a magnificent Roman villa in Folkestone, Kent. First discovered in 1923, the site was reopened last year. Those digging know they are probably close to the spot where the Romans first landed in Britain under Emperor Claudius in 43 AD. The excavation of this villa on the edge of Folkestone is being directed by professional archaeologists, but depends on an army of local volunteers who are all passionate about the history of their area. And this site occupies such an amazing place with a spectacular view looking out over the channel. Its location and the size of this villa makes archaeologists think it belonged to somebody important. I'm meeting Andrew Richardson, site supervisor since it reopened last year. The building itself looks, this looks almost palatial in its
Well, this is only a small part of it. This is one wing of 2 wings projecting from the front of a long rectangular building. You've got further blocks beyond the fence over there, and a third block which would have been a bath block. And quite a lot of that has actually gone over the cliff, has been lost to erosion.
The extraordinary size and prime location suggest that the inhabitant was well connected. So what sort of person would have lived in a villa like this with its own bathhouse?
Obviously somebody, either an individual or a family of immense wealth and power. Somebody who's come from the empire said, I like this spot and I'm going to build myself a proper Roman residence.
But something more concrete is needed to pinpoint the individual's actual identity. Dozens of trademarked roof tiles have come up from the soil, linking the former inhabitant to the Roman navy. the Classis Britannica.
These are two very special tiles because they're stamped with a circular stamp and the letters CLBR.
So what does this stand for?
It stands for Classis Britannica.
So this is a stamp of the Roman fleet in Britain?
Yes, and we do know that the fleet was commanded by prefects.
So this position, the prefect of Classis Britannicae, that's kind of equivalent to an admiral?
Equivalent to an admiral, yeah, and perhaps commanding 30 ships and several thousand men. Probably its primary role was transport for the army, but it certainly also had a role in both patrolling the seas and also exploration, establishing just how big this island the Romans had come to was.
In the island of Britannia, whoever commanded the sea controlled the land. 7 possible Roman fortified harbours cluster around the Kent Peninsula, with Folkestone in the centre, facing Boulogne. The quantity of the tiles found here and the villa's geographical position raises the tantalising possibility that this villa once housed the commander of the fleet.
One suggestion is it's the admiral's, the prefect's house. It looks straight out to Boulogne, which is the headquarters of their main fleet base, a large fort. Further along the coast at Dover, they've got a fort, and they've got another fort at Lymm to the west. And this is almost halfway between Dover and Lymm. You can imagine that, the commander of what is effectively the most powerful military organisation in the region at the time is the sort of person who would have the clout to live at a place like this.
The idea that this was the home of one of Britain's first and most important naval commanders is incredibly exciting. The volunteers are rediscovering the layout of this once luxurious home.
It is amazing just to touch a piece of archaeology, something that you know that you're the first person that has touched it in 2,000 years or more.
So Ian, we heard you just found something.
That's right, yes. A coin, probably Roman. Minimum.
Just come up.
Yep.
So Ian, you've just found this?
Yep.
Can I have a look?
Yeah.
What is it, Keith?
I should guess it's late 3rd or 4th century Roman.
Oh, I'm amazed you managed to find that, Ian. It's absolutely tiny.
Ian's coin adds to the hundreds found here, suggesting the site existed for most of the Roman period, stretching from the Claudian invasion in 43 AD right into the 360s, 50 years before the end of Roman Britain. It was forgotten for nearly 1,500 years more, and now it faces destruction.
There is a particular sense of urgency to the excavations here at Folkestone because this villa is slowly but surely slipping down the cliffs into the sea. The bathhouse has already disappeared. And this is partly why so many local people have volunteered here, because they know that it will soon be too late.
Project Director Leslie Hardy knows that this is, in every sense, archaeology on the edge.
This really is a rescue excavation, isn't it? Because this villa is under threat.
Yes, you can see this is a photograph that was taken in 1924. And here what we've done is we've superimposed a line which shows the current cliff edge. And you can see how much has already been lost.
So it looks like part of the Roman buildings have actually been lost. Which area is this?
OK, this is the bathhouse area of that block, and it's gone. It's largely gone now over the edge of the cliff. It tends to go in clumps and big bites. It's just sliding down constantly, bringing all the archaeology with it.
The sea is waiting to claim this unique site. In this race against time, the archaeologists must get there first, salvaging material forgotten for 1.5 millennia, in search of more evidence that this was indeed the home of the commander of the Roman Navy. But often in archaeology, the discovery of objects is merely page 1, chapter 1 in the reappraisal of history, for the finds themselves frequently baffle us. I'm travelling towards Buckinghamshire, where last year we discovered a truly shocking mystery: the bones of 97 babies, which had been buried beneath a Roman villa called Uden, just outside the village of Hambledon.
There's something very strange going on there, isn't there?
97 babies in one rural site, all about the same age. Horrifying conclusions were unavoidable.
What we're dealing with is infants that died around time of birth, and that made us think that perhaps these individuals were being deliberately killed.
But why?
The only explanation you keep coming back to is it's got to have been a brothel.
The case of the 97 dead babies at Uden Roman Villa was, I think, the most disturbing story that we covered last year. And it caught the imagination of people not just in Britain, but around the world. It really is a mystery. Were those babies murdered? And if so, why? Well, when I looked at the bones more closely when we'd finished filming, I noticed what I thought was probably a cut mark on one of them. So it all sounds even more sinister, and I had to investigate further.
I asked two other experts in human bones, Simon Mays and Kate Robson-Brown, to help me find out if those cut marks were ancient or if they could have been made by an archaeologist's trowel.
What do you think of those, Kate?
You can't quite tell how deep they go.
So can we look at these underneath the light microscope just to see what those cuts look like?
I think that would help. Have a look and see if there's any sediment in them.
If these cuts have got sediment in them, then that suggests that they're genuine old Roman cuts.
The microscopic image suggests that a knife was indeed taken to this baby, cutting the flesh right down to the bone.
Now I think you can see that one does look like there's sediment in it. And you can almost see the mineral sparkle of the soil there. So there's definitely soil inside those cut marks.
Right, that does suggest then that we're looking at something that's ancient rather than recent.
Oh, that's really intriguing.
The presence of the soil that they were buried in, embedded deep inside the cuts, strongly suggests that the cuts are very old. They could have been made around the time of the baby's death. But why might these babies have been killed? Romans sometimes limited family size by killing babies, especially female ones. The appearance of these bones can't tell us if the babies were male or female, but their DNA can. Wrapped up to prevent contamination, Kerry Brown, an expert in ancient human DNA, chose 10 of the skeletons. But extracting ancient DNA is a painstaking task. The results, however, are clear. 5 girls and 5 boys. It's only a tiny sample, but now we know it wasn't just female infanticide. But can the artefacts found at the villa tell us if the deaths were close enough in time to justify the grim conclusion of murder? I met the archaeologist Jill Ayres to find out when the objects were produced.
We were absolutely blessed with a wealth, about 34 kilograms of material that is very datable. Just as an example, that little vessel is a cup. I've got Crobiceau. It's Crobiceau M, which M is short for Manu, manufactured by the hand of Crobiceau. So this is a potter between 135 and 180. So I can say absolutely the babies we have the dates for are 150 to 200 AD.
So many infant deaths over just 50 years in one rural site. It seems too many to be the result of natural causes. It points to foul play.
Now, when I spoke to you about this last year, you suggested the idea of a brothel as a potential explanation for a lot of unwanted children. Where are you now with your brothel theory? Do you think that this is the most likely explanation?
Well, to tell you the truth, I didn't want to favour it. I put it forward as a suggestion to get people going. Now, studying all the artefacts, all the data, every alternative for natural explanations that I can think of, I'm back with the brothel. First of all, we've got a lot of females on site, as shown by female artefacts.
So are these some of the female artefacts?
I've just bought a couple of little things just to show you. Beautiful little hairpins, beautiful carved items, a whole range of these on site.
Jill has further evidence that she believes may bolster her theory that this was a brothel, a fragment of pornographic pottery.
Oh, that is quite naughty. I can see what they're doing. So there's one person standing here, there's another person standing behind them, and something unmentionable is going on just there.
So, a suggestive clue. But where would the customers have come from? Hambledon is in the middle of nowhere.
That was my biggest problem when I tentatively suggested it, because where are the clientele coming from? It's a rural location. Then we discovered some of the trackways that lead from the river, the major arterial route in the Roman world. We've got a track leading from the river right past Uden and goes directly to Dorchester.
Jill also believes that there might once have been a ford near Uden Villa. Divers have told her that the Thames is unusually shallow here. I'm going to see for myself. The river really does seem shallow enough that in Roman times it might have been a ford. Perhaps passing trade had to unload here and then turn to Uden brothel for some refreshment. Over the last year, Jill has been looking again at the finds from Uden and the wider landscape and exploring her brothel idea.
I'm intrigued by Jill's theory about Uden being a brothel, but I'm not at all convinced by it. It seems to be based on almost entirely circumstantial evidence. Well, now I'm hoping to look at some hard evidence in the form of artefacts from the villa excavations, and they're held at Buckinghamshire County Museum, where I'm going to meet the curator.
His name is Brett Thorne.
Brett, what do you think of Jill's theory about the villa being a brothel?
I'm not convinced, I have to say. It's too far from any major population centres. What we have here are some objects from the excavation.
These finely crafted objects suggest something other than the cold-blooded murder of babies, a far more benign explanation.
One that's been suggested involves the cult of the mother goddess. There are, from thousands of objects on the site, 3 which relate to the mother goddess cult, potentially.
A beautiful piece of pottery bears signs of this cult.
This is wonderful.
This is a mortarium. It's a grinding bowl. And what's special about this one is the decoration you can see.
It's got peacocks on it.
Exactly. So the peacock is the symbol of Juno, a Roman goddess who is involved with childbirth.
Well, the top Roman goddess.
Exactly,
yeah, the
queen of the gods.
Yeah.
There's more evidence as well. A scarab beetle evoking the Egyptian mother goddess Isis, and an intriguing sherd of pottery.
This one is a favourite, and it's only a tiny fragment of a statuette. What you've got here is an arm holding a baby.
I can see the little baby there in the crook of her arm.
Yeah, and this is the side of a chair. It's a woman holding usually a baby on each breast, nursing.
Yeah.
And this is called the Dea Nutrix, the nursing goddess.
It looks almost like a Madonna and child, you know, this is like iconography which happens in Christian times.
Exactly, it's the mother and child, it's an eternal symbol, isn't it? So you have a Roman mother cult, you have a Gallic or Celtic mother cult, and then you have this carved stone scarab beetle. Yeah. Isis is the Egyptian mother goddess.
Yeah.
If you've got a cult of the mother goddess there, then it could be somewhere to go for protection, for help during times of birth.
So perhaps women used Uden Villa as a birth centre, with a doctor present. Could this explain those cut marks I saw on one of the baby's bones?
One of the possible explanations for this that Simon Mays and I discussed was that they might have been cut marks that were made during an embryotomy in order to save the mother's life. If this was a dead baby,
Deliver a dead baby, yeah.
then that could be an explanation. So maybe there was something going on in terms of obstetrics at
Somebody
Uden
who
Villa.
at least was trying to help, yeah. Be it the priestesses of the cult or the local midwives or whoever, but if you've got women regularly coming to give birth, somebody's going to know what to do.
If women from the region did come to Uden to give birth, the large number of infant deaths could be explained without citing murder. Yet, the evidence for Brett's idea is no less circumstantial than Jill's.
So what we've got here at Uden is an infant cemetery with ages at death that strongly suggest infanticide. But are we looking at something which is simply an extreme of what was normal for Roman society, because we know that the Romans did practice infanticide? Or is there something else going on here to explain all of those dead babies? Could this have been a birthing centre or a brothel? Well, the evidence as it stands is, I think, inconclusive. I'm going to sit on the fence on this one and wait for more evidence to come to light. So at the moment, Uden remains a bit of a mystery.
At times, archaeology merely tantalises us. But I'm on my way to an entire lost Roman town that promises to radically rewrite the history books. It lies beyond a supposed boundary of Roman rule, Exeter, in an area where mighty legions once feared to tread. Or did they? In 2009, two metal detectorists, Jim Wills and Dennis Hewings, made an unexpected discovery in a field outside a tiny village in South Devon, 30 miles west of Exeter. A Roman coin. Then they found another and another. They carried on finding them. Soon they had dozens. An extraordinary story was beginning.
But this doesn't seem to make any sense. There aren't really meant to be any Roman settlements west of Exeter. The metal detectorists contacted the Portable Antiquities Scheme, the organisation that manages finds like these made by the general public right across the UK. And the people at the PAS realised that this was potentially a very important discovery.
This March, Danielle Wotton, Devon's PAS officer, began leading the excavations. Yet more coins began to appear, suggesting an astonishing story. This was probably a missing Roman town in a region they were never supposed to have settled. Danielle took me to the top of the hill to look over the fields, where an entire town lies waiting to be unearthed.
This large field here is a field that we can see over there with the trench in. That's where we've put one of the trenches. There's features in all these fields. We've got 13 fields worth of features.
And that's over a huge area
over
then?
A massive area, absolutely.
What has been discovered of this town already covers many acres of land, and there may be more. Danielle knows that these now tranquil fields were once bustling with life.
What an amazing sight. You know, sights like this always astound me, because what you're looking at now is just a rural landscape with lots of fields.
And now that's the amazing thing. I mean, it's very, very quiet and rural now. But what we've got to try and imagine actually are houses, round houses, set within enclosures, little paddocks where there's perhaps horses, cows, sheep, children running around playing games, smoke coming up from the roofs of the houses. Just amazing to look out on this landscape and just imagine that life here 2,000 years ago.
The digging resumed in June with the help of dozens of eager local volunteers. Hundreds of objects, rare pieces of pottery and scores of coins started to come up out of the ground.
We've got a large selection of coins. Our earliest coin is a Roman Republican coin. It's the coin of Achilles, which dates back to 49 BC.
Oh, right. So this is... How is this getting to Britain then? Britain's not part of the Roman Empire at that point.
No, absolutely not. We think what's happening here is because the silver's such good quality, that is staying in circulation much later on in later centuries.
Right.
So it's kind of the equivalent of having some Victorian change on you, when you come over to Britain.
So this is a coin that was minted in the 1st century BC, but probably came over here in the 1st century AD.
Absolutely.
That's lovely.
The coins suggest a long life for this town. From the first years after the invasion until the last century of occupation, this was no passing encampment, but a substantial Romano-British settlement of almost 400 years. These discoveries are building a picture of a thriving town, but in an area always thought too dangerous to occupy. And the clincher is the discovery of a Roman road connecting the town to the wider world.
Well, Danielle, this is very exciting. Did you expect to find this?
This is something that came up as a result of doing the geophysics. We could see that there was something traipsing along through the site, through the settlement, and what you can see here is a section of it.
Yeah.
So we're actually standing on top of a 2,000-year-old road here.
So from the orientation of this road, where do you think it goes from and to?
I suspect part of it is going to Exeter, probably heading out towards the coast. So perhaps we've got some kind of trade route here. Given that we've got all this imported pottery, it would make sense.
So far, archaeologists have found 97 coins, hundreds of artefacts, and even a buried Roman road. But towns house people. While I was on site, Danielle's team was uncovering the first evidence of the town's forgotten inhabitants.
You can just see the top. We have some human remains. We have part of the skeleton just coming up through the soil.
Can I get down there?
Yeah, sure.
So this is, the outline of a skull. So the top half, or the side of the skull has been taken away. I think we've got some teeth down here, and then we're just seeing the outline of the skull coming around here.
The people who lived, worked and died in this forgotten town are coming up out of the ground, revealed by the archaeologist's trowel, unearthing a possible burial ground.
Is that another one over there?
Another one here. So here you can see we have the top of a skull. And so this is kind of throwing up even more questions than we were expecting, really. We were just looking for the road, and now it looks like we've got possibly some kind of cemetery.
If this chance find is a cemetery, we will one day know much more about the long-vanished town and its people.
It's so exciting being here at the beginning of something which I imagine is going to turn out to be a massive archaeological story. I can imagine that in 10 or 20 years' time, people will be writing history books and will be talking about this site as the one that revolutionised our understanding of the Romans in the southwest.
I'm travelling from Exeter to Wales to Caerleon in the tracks of the mighty 2nd Legion Augusta, which abandoned Exeter in 75 AD. This amphitheatre is part of the massive Caerleon fort complex, also started in 75 AD by General Frontius. It was first dug in 1909, but more than a century later, it is throwing up objects that breathe new life into the legion's long-dead men.
Caerleon Roman Amphitheatre is one of the great symbols of Roman Britain, up there with Hadrian's Wall. And for many local children, it's their first real experience of the Romans. I certainly remember coming here on a primary school field trip, and it had a big impact on me. But just last year, new excavations unearthed something extraordinary, a warehouse full of objects which give us an insight into the Romans' private lives.
The archaeologist in charge of the dig is Peter Guest.
Peter, this is an extraordinary collection of finds to come from one excavation.
And what you see in front of you is just a selection of the 1,200 or so metal and other objects that were recovered over 6 weeks last year.
And I've never seen such a beautiful assortment of Roman artefacts from one site, amongst them these fish brooches.
Originally, they would have had enamel in the eye, very beautiful examples of their type, and to find 3 together is extremely rare.
These exquisite brooches probably once belonged to long-dead legionnaires and their wives. So too did this head of the goddess Minerva.
and then this extremely nice fitting, which is you can see the lion's head there.
He's fantastic. What would that
bronze.
have been? That would have been part of a piece of furniture then?
Probably part of a piece of furniture. You can see the iron tang that would have gone into the side of a wooden object.
This lovely lion's head was perhaps intended for a funerary casket, breaking before it could be used and ending up in the warehouse instead, with everything else.
It seems like such a motley collection of objects. It's almost like a junk shop.
Or possibly a lock-up kind of store, you know, like the things that we use today, where if you've got too many things in your house, you hire a small unit and you put all the things you don't really need immediately away there.
Amongst those objects, destined for Killian's Roman Legion Museum, was something mysterious and utterly unique. Pieces of a Roman garment. They are being painstakingly conserved in Cardiff.
Penny, what have you got here?
Well, this is one of the lumps that we actually excavated from Killian, and basically it came to me like this. We had to sort of wrap it up carefully so it could be transported, but when the top was taken off, we seem to have this extremely interesting sort of fish scale effect, which has been created through very tiny sort of flat-headed pins.
I mean, it almost looks like sequins, doesn't it?
Yes, they are, and they've been laid on top of each other in such a way to move and create a sort of shimmering effect.
Penny thinks she has a garment here, unlike anything previously discovered.
So this is unique. There's nothing like it across the whole of the known Roman Empire.
I've never seen anything like this before, and as far as I know, the curators are not aware of anything like this before from the Roman Empire.
Is it some kind of armour?
Possibly part of it, a decorative part of it.
Another piece of this garment provides one more clue to the owner's identity, suggesting this could indeed have been armour.
There was another...
That's got a little face on it. Yeah. So this was part of it?
That was, and it's got a solid head of Mithras attached.
So this is quite an extraordinary garment. I mean, it would have been wonderful with the fish scales glimmering, and then you've also got these little details, like the head of Mithras. And he is a god, I think. He's particularly associated with the Roman army.
Very much, yes.
This tiny little head brings me closer to the person who once wore this garment, to the soldiers from every corner of the empire who came to Killian Fort and adopted the weird male-only warrior cult of Mithras, bathing themselves in bull's blood. This garment is a one-off, with all the individuality of a person. We may never know who owned this or exactly when he wore it. When this armour is finally restored, it will present cryptic clues to the crumbling of Roman power in Killian.
It's thought that by the early 4th century here, the Roman military presence had, if not completely disappeared, at least been significantly reduced. So you can imagine the people staying on, struggling to maintain what had once been a great fortress, as buildings fell into ruins about them. And in a corner of a crumbling warehouse, that forgotten suit of armour, well, those objects that were missed by people all those centuries ago were preserved for archaeologists to find. So after 1,700 years of oblivion, they've gained a new life.
The once glittering armour, adorned with the head of the warrior god Mithras, brings us face to face with the Roman soldiers of Killian and how they worshipped. And 70 miles away in rural Dorset, deep inside Roman Britain, a site is throwing up exciting clues to a complex pattern of belief across Britannia.
most people know that the Romans were capable of religious intolerance, doing things like throwing Christians to the lions, for instance. But returning to Bear Regis, a site I visited last year, they're now finding evidence that life here was much more harmonious and even curiously modern.
More than 200 students work here on what is one of the country's largest digs. My day here is, I'm told, the rainiest day in its 3-year history. And as the day progresses, it becomes a mudfest worthy of Glastonbury, trowels dredging up a mud-spattered Roman Britain. For the Romans, Bear Regis was probably an ideal colony, a profitable farmstead made rich by grain and pottery with a compliant ruling class. By 350, Britannia was part of an officially Christian empire. But the truth, as site director Miles Russell knows, is much more complicated.
Miles, where are we standing right now?
Well, we're standing at the moment in the remains of a very late Roman, probably not a villa as such, but it is a very Romanised building. And this, I think, is probably our most impressive find to date. It's a little pendant, because it's pierced in the middle there.
Yeah.
This is actually a reused coin. It's actually of the Emperor Magnentius in the 350s AD. And from our point of view, the key interest is that it's a Christian symbol.
That it's a Chi-rho. Yeah, so you can see the rho and the chi, so that's the first 2 letters of Christ's name.
Exactly. So someone's taken that coin and has obviously turned it into a pendant to identify themselves as an adherent to Christ, to the Christian God.
But Christianity was only one religion in Dorset, in rainy Britannia, at this time.
So have you got evidence of other religions or other faiths still being practised at the same time as Christianity?
Yes, indeed. We've got this nice little bone handle, and you can see this female figure with a very ornate headdress, and then a series of eagles and birds around the outer side.
Oh, they're lovely. Wow.
This is an image of Medusa.
I can't see any snakes around her head, though.
No. I mean, it's actually her being shown as a healer, as associated with animals.
Right.
But the key thing is this is being used at the same time that someone is wearing this Christian pendant. If Christianity has become the state faith whereby all other faiths have to be rejected, then this is exactly the kind of object that shouldn't be used. But it's quite clear from this and from other material that people are still accepting of the non-Christian gods.
It's interesting that towards the end of the Roman period on this site, we're seeing a spirit of religious tolerance with different faiths being practised alongside each other. And in fact, there's a similar story right at the beginning of the Roman period. We don't see an abrupt transition from one lifestyle and set of rituals to another. And we're seeing that very clearly from the burial practices on this site.
The archaeologists think they found a cemetery for the elite. Dated to the late 1st century, these people would have interacted with the earliest Roman officials. And each is buried in a strangely contorted position, alongside symbols of wealth, pots. This is evidence of a local religion which you might have expected the Roman conquerors to stamp out.
Miles, looking at these 2 burials here, there seem to be a lot of similarities. They're obviously both in a crouched position.
All the burials that we get here and across this part of Dorset, they're all the same. They're all crouched, or sort of the knees are up towards the chest. They're all lying on their right side, and the head is always at the eastern end of the grave cut, so the face is facing north. And I think these burials show that the impact of Rome wasn't that extreme to begin with, that people are still carrying on their practices, they're still worshipping their gods.
And in terms of these particular burials that we're looking at just here, do you think these are the elite that we're looking at?
I think they probably are. These are the well-to-do elements. Possibly these are the last set of people who are harking back to an earlier age, to a more sort of British culture.
So it seems that some people living here were doing very well indeed out of being part of the Roman Empire. But what we have to remember is that those crouch burials are high status. That's the wealthy elite we're looking at. life wasn't nearly so rosy for everyone else as their bones reveal.
Dozens of other skeletons from the dig have been brought to the mobile unit on site, where bone expert Martin Smith is examining them for telltale signs of their lives and deaths.
Martin, we've got some clues about what was going on with this population as they became part of the Roman world, but what do their bones tell us?
Yeah, this individual has a few things going on here. This is someone who is sort of moving into later adolescence, as far as we can tell from looking at their bones. We've seen in some individuals' teeth these horizontal lines running across the teeth, and what these are showing up is episodes of arrested development when this person was very young. So the enamel stopped developing and then restarted again. And so these are telling us about specific episodes of either severe illness or of malnourishment.
The long bones seem to support this dark picture of widespread starvation, of lives blighted by poverty.
This is from a child aged about 9 or 10. If we look here, this is an X-ray of that one there.
Of this actual bone?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's an X-ray of the tibia.
And I can see the problem there immediately. I can see these tide lines in it.
Each of these little lines, similar to what we were seeing in the teeth, each of these represent a specific episode of arrested growth in that individual. So this person was either severely ill or really quite badly malnourished.
So would you say that there was an unusual level of physiological stress in this population during Roman times?
That's a good question. And it may be the case that the people who are owning the villa may have been doing very well for themselves, but the people who are actually working on the land, who possibly may actually have been slaves, may not have had the same kind of access to resources and the same kind of access to interesting diets and so on.
Martin's examination of these young people's bones provides us with a stark reminder of a brutal world, a world that only archaeology can recapture. Along Hadrian's Wall alone, there were 4 huge Roman excavations this year. Just south along the Roman road of Deer Street, I'm on my way to a dig that has thrown up astonishing evidence about what happened inside the forts after the Romans left Britain in 410 AD.
So what do we know about the Roman occupation of Britain? Well, they arrived here in 43 AD, they ruled here, they built here for nearly 4 centuries. Then they packed up and left in 410, snuffing out the flame of civilization and plunging Britain into the Dark Ages. But what if the Romans never actually left? What they're finding now at Binchester raises that very possibility.
The last days of Roman Britain are emerging from the dark mud.
I mean, it almost looks like there was some kind of floor surface that's been laid down reusing other stone, and then this bit's been robbed out.
Yeah. It has long been assumed that when the Roman Empire stopped paying their troops, the soldiers were forced to leave in search of a new living. But excavations in Binchester's barracks are illustrating an untold story in which the soldiers stay on and go native. And the tale starts somewhere quite unremarkable, a hole filled with animal bones.
So what are we standing in here?
We're standing in a very big stone-lined pit. We're almost certain that what we've got here is evidence for a tanning industry, turning cow hides into leather. And it's quite a complicated process which involves soaking the hides in a variety of different noxious substances, scraping all the fat off the cow hides.
This hole is certainly large enough to soak a few cow hides, but David Petts has other evidence to support his theory.
The first thing is these are big holes, big pits, and the other thing is we've got lots of animal bone out of these pits, skull fragments and fragments of the feet.
And you've got some bones here.
And we've got a range of the kind of things we've been finding. We found this
part of a cow skull.
Cow skull, which is out of this pit, and we've got lots of other jaws, fragments of horn, fragments of skull. And these are exactly the kind of things you get with a tannery, because when you skin the cow, the skull and the feet come with it.
David thinks he's discovered evidence of an industry that grew up after Rome stopped its soldiers' wages, and perhaps the Romans never really left.
So you actually think it's the Roman soldiers who stayed here?
Absolutely. When governments go, the people don't. The people are still there, and they've still got to kind of find a way of living and find a way of going on, no matter what happens.
And how remarkable that you've actually managed to identify the industry that they were engaged in here.
Binchester is the largest Roman fort in County Durham, and only a tiny part of it has been excavated so far. The discovery of objects revising our understanding of the Roman withdrawal makes it an important site. More evidence is emerging out of the soil, not just of a tanning industry, but something even more unexpected: jewellery workshops continuing when civilization was thought to have collapsed.
We also think we're getting evidence for either very late or immediately post-Roman jet working. We've actually got lumps of raw jet. So
Lovely.
That must have actually come up from Whitby.
Yeah.
And you've also got things like this. It's a fragment of a jet bangle.
Right.
Which is still unfinished. It hasn't been polished off, and it must have been broken when it was being produced. So clearly it's being used by the local people.
Specialist craftwork and a trade in jewellery after the collapse of civilization? Could these really have emerged from the shadows of the Dark Ages? In order to see some better preserved small finds, I'm visiting what was once the commander's house and custodian Rob Collins.
Rob, you've got some wonderful finds here.
Binchester has produced a load of material, really, in just the 2.5 seasons we've done.
I love these beads.
Yes, we have a number of different beads, so they're segmented beads, that's what we call them.
And are they actually drilled through?
They actually do drill through them, and you get strings of them.
That's really
Some necklaces. Jet is very friable, so it breaks and splits quite easily if you don't know how to work it properly. And that's quite interesting that we've got specialist craft workers on site in probably the years after the end of the Roman Empire.
Right.
Some of this jewellery looks significantly more Roman than others. Officers and magistrates would have worn these crossbow brooches to proclaim their importance in the Roman hierarchy. But after 410 AD, the crossbow brooch vanishes from the dig, and the Romans who stay on here adopt a style of brooch from times before the army ever set foot on Britannia's shores. A penannular brooch, shaped like a broken circle.
This is a terminal of a penannular brooch. So it would be C-shaped in its full form, and that's just the tiny end of it there.
Right.
But that's much more of a British type of object. And what is quite interesting is that the crossbow brooches, those very large, honking Roman symbols of power, don't continue on in the post-Roman years, but penannular brooches do.
Why do you think they didn't carry on making brooches in the Roman style?
I suspect that the frontier is a dangerous place, and I think as Roman power is withdrawing, the people who are here are needing to make new alliances. So perhaps it's better to display your Britishness rather than your Romanness.
So life is changing.
Life is changing very much.
As the archaeology at Binchester shows, it's much too simplistic to imagine one epoch, Roman Britain, suddenly ending as another, the Dark Ages, begins. In truth, one period always bleeds slowly into the next. People don't abandon their beliefs and lifestyles overnight, and in our material culture, the past often lives on into the present.
This church, just a few miles away from Binchester Roman Fort, is one of the earliest in England. It was built by the Anglo-Saxons using stone from the fort. And it represents the endless recycling of materials by subsequent generations and cultures. And here, those Roman stones are part of a building which is still in use today.
From this church built after the Roman withdrawal to the magnificent villa near the place they probably first landed, the Romans are still very much with us, even in the soil beneath our feet.
It always surprises me that during this period of history, the Roman occupation of Britain spanning nearly 4 centuries, we are still learning new information from archaeology, like the discovery of an unexpected Romano-British settlement to the west of Exeter. And here at Binchester, what seemed to be Romans staying on long after their army has packed up and left. It brings it home to me that there are still many discoveries to be made, and so even as I speak, the digging continues.
We might be a small island, but we've got a big history. Everywhere you stand, there are worlds beneath your feet. And so every year, hundreds of archaeologists across Britain go looking for more clues into our story. Who lived here, when and how.
There's a blade here, here, so he's being attacked from all angles.
Archaeology is a complex jigsaw puzzle, drawing everything together from skeletons to swords, temples to treasure.
He's biting his shield.
Biting his shield, yeah.
From Orkney to Devon, we're joining this year's quest on sea, land and air. We share all of the questions and find some of the answers as we join the teams in the field, digging for Britain.
Throughout its history, Britain has been divided and enriched by invaders from overseas, and none have gripped our imaginations quite as much as the Vikings. But how much of what we think we know about the Vikings is just a stereotype? Do they really live up to their savage reputation? And how much did they influence and shape British culture?
This year's archaeology is enriching and challenging our vision of the Vikings, with digs, artefacts and messages they left behind.
Wow, that is a beautiful object.
Like the fortress of a Norwegian Viking chief in Orkney.
This cup is absolutely extraordinary, isn't it?
The magnificent hoard of silver buried in a time of bloodshed. And the victims of a vicious nationwide massacre.
But you're suddenly kind of connecting with this awful moment, which is his death.
On the Isle of Harris in the Outer Hebrides, archaeologists are just starting to bring evidence of the earliest Vikings to light. A team from the University of Birmingham is digging at a site called Horgabost. The name itself has a Norse origin, a strong hint that the Vikings were here.
Just over these dunes is one of this season's targets. Now, archaeologists have been digging here before and they discovered an Iron Age settlement. But there is some archaeological evidence that the Vikings were here too. A couple of burials threatened by erosion seem to have been Norse, and small Norse finds have been discovered as well. But the archaeologists are really hoping that they're going to find evidence of a settlement. And if they do that, it will be the first of its kind on Harris.
OK then, Alice, what we have here is a very interesting Iron Age site with a bit of a mysterious end to it, which we're sort of trying to come to terms with at the moment. If you step this way...
Some very striking layers in the ground there.
Absolutely.
The team is being led by Kevin Coles, and I joined them right at the start of the digging season. The site may hold the key to the first contacts between incoming Vikings and the Gallic people already living here. Will it be a story of destruction?
What's slightly more mysterious and slightly more interesting for me is this deposit here that's sealing everything else.
What is that? I mean, it's a completely different colour as well.
Completely different colour. It's almost a demolition debris full of very late Iron Age pottery.
Right.
And lots of charcoal, lots of sort of waste material.
Sometimes archaeology works this way. They're finding subtle glimpses within the soil, of a time of abandonment.
The important thing is we need to find out when this occurred, and that's why we're taking samples for carbon dating and hopefully see if it can be because of the Norse invasion, or when the Vikings came to the islands, and whether it sort of clashes with this site being abandoned.
Close by, a building is emerging that seems to be rectangular in shape, a style that is Scandinavian and unlike the roundhouses favoured by Iron Age people. So could this be evidence of Vikings displacing the original inhabitants?
No, there's a nice corner here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's lots of stones in this vicinity, which suggests that the feature is running under the dunes.
Oh, I can see some here. Yeah, so they carry on going backwards, possibly in this direction.
There's more here.
Yeah. Are you going to extend the trench back?
We will extend the trench back and see if we can get the full plan and see if it is a rectangular house, which would be in line with a Norse longhouse.
But so far, perhaps the strongest evidence of the meeting of these cultures comes from a scattering of objects found across the site.
So we have, the things on this side are late Iron Age in date. So you've got a storage jar or a big cooking pot there made from ceramic. We've also got this very strange, looks like a rock. If you feel the coarseness of the outside edge when compared to the flat edge, it's been used and used constantly.
Yeah, so what's that been used for?
We suspect it's used for working animal hides.
And that fits so nicely in your hand, doesn't it?
It's very tactile, yeah.
So these finds are intriguing because they could be later Iron Age, they could be Norse.
Absolutely.
You can't really distinguish between them.
No, you can't.
But from their early investigations comes the first conclusive proof of contact with the Vikings. A tiny scrap of steatite, or soapstone, a material often imported from Scandinavia and found in great quantities on Norse sites right across Britain.
But what you can say from this fragment of soapstone bowl is that this is typically Viking. Either somebody who was already here learned how to make such a thing from a Viking, or they got it from a Viking, or it belonged to a Viking.
Exactly. So the Vikings were here.
Yeah. You can see why the Vikings might have felt at home here. This is a landscape that's perfectly suited to their seafaring way of life. You can just imagine their longships coming in and then being pulled up on these flat, wide beaches, ready to start a new life in a land that's completely surrounded by sea. And the arrival of the Vikings would mark the beginning of a new phase in this island's history, and one that would leave a lasting impression.
It's a history that is still frustratingly just below the surface on Harris. But I don't have to look far to find more substantial evidence of Norse culture. Just up the road, on the adjoining Isle of Lewis, is perhaps the most famous and iconic Scandinavian treasure ever discovered in Scotland. It was found in the 1800s, but dates from the 12th century, a time when Lewis was controlled by the kings of Norway. Still shrouded in mystery, it's a compendium of 93 ivory chess and gaming pieces, known to us as the Lewis Chessmen.
A selection of the chessmen has come back to Lewis some 180 years after they were first thought to have been found. They are such charismatic little figures, and I've been fascinated by them since I was a child. My grandparents had a replica chess set. Well, now they're on tour following a new piece of research looking into their origins and their story. And it's so lovely to come here to Stornoway to see them close to where they were discovered.
The new research places the chessmen firmly at the heart of the once powerful but now forgotten Kingdom of the Isles, a hybrid Norse-Gallic state controlled by the kings of Norway. The project has been led by Dr. David Caldwell from the National Museum of Scotland.
So we've got all the characters you would expect. We've got kings and queens and bishops and knights. And who's this character here?
Right, this is a warrior or warder, and nowadays he's normally represented by a tower. He's a rook, in other words, yeah. Although this particular one, as you can just see there...
He's biting his shield.
Biting his shield, yeah. This, in fact, I think is one of the key bits of evidence that these pieces were made in the Scandinavian world, because that's a reference to a cult in the Scandinavian world, the cult of the berserkers. The berserkers were warriors who got so high before going into battle that they had to bite their shields to hold themselves back.
Really?
And I don't think this chessman is really a berserker, but I think it's the carver, in a way, just showing his cultural roots, or perhaps gently poking fun at some of his contemporaries by showing that.
The finding of the chessmen is shrouded in mystery. Tradition has it they were lost by a passing merchant, but David thinks it's possible they were owned by an important person living on Lewis.
Lewis was the centre, or one of the centres, of a Scandinavian kingdom, the Kingdom of the Isles, which people have now forgotten about. But it's a very important kingdom on a European model, which was here until 1266.
This was the year in which the Vikings handed the Hebrides over to Scotland for the sum of 4,000 marks, ending 4 centuries of Norwegian sovereignty on the islands. But who made these beautiful figures? Detailed study of their faces has revealed that they fall into 5 different types, which suggests they were made by 5 different craftsmen.
I mean, this face is beautiful.
Yeah, that's one of my favourites. The craftsman who made this was exceptionally good. And ivory is an amazingly tough material to carve. It must have taken days to do this, but just the subtlety of the expression there, just the look. And even when you move away from the face and you look at the knuckles, the detail there, you can almost sense that the hand is actually gripping that sword.
Those little hands are absolutely beautiful. And the face, the contours of the face, there's even a change in contour when we go from the cheek down to the upper lip. That crease between the nose and the mouth is shown.
These figures may be stylised, but there's every reason to believe they're based on living Scandinavians. The people who carved them were paying attention to authentic details.
So the clothes aren't just figments of the imagination of the carver. This is real attire that is being represented.
Yes, they clearly have a very good understanding of what they're representing. They understand the different layers of vestments that a bishop is wearing, the chasubles, the albs, and everything else. And they represent that very carefully indeed.
These craftsmen probably worked in a major centre in Norway, where they could closely observe high-status Scandinavians, where they may even have had bishops or kings as their patrons. The Vikings came to the Western Isles and created a Scandinavian state to rival the kingdoms of England and Scotland, one that we've all but forgotten about. And we have potent Viking legacies in the form of amazing craftwork that reminds us of our shared Scandinavian genes. But what lured the Vikings here in the first place? Back on Harris is another site where the archaeology is reminding us that they first came here to plunder. It's a possible medieval monastery, the ultimate temptation for a seafaring pirate. History tells us that the riches of these Christian monasteries are what drew the Vikings to our shores. This site houses a ruined chapel, and there are traces dating all the way back to an Iron Age broch or tower. Professor John Hunter is overseeing the excavations here.
Anyway, if we stand here, we just look round here. This is the outer face of the broch. Huge stones.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And you can see the collapse has fallen.
Massive.
And
Massively thick wall.
The wall's 4 metres thick, roughly. If there was an early monastery here, you're directly on the great sea routes that bring Norwegian Vikings all the way down to Ireland, and they would have seen this. It would have been sweets for the taking, really would.
Just outside the boundary of the possible monastery are some graves that might be Norse. and the team has discovered the first fragments of whoever was buried here. But is it a long-dead Viking?
Oh, OK, so as well as these bits of bone...
Tooth.
A tooth,
Right,
yeah.
tell us about that then. Where's it from?
Well, it looks like a lower incisor, I think, and it's very worn, so all of the enamel on the top has been worn down. It's somebody, he's an adult and he's been wearing that tooth down for many years, yeah.
Even if these are all that remains of a Viking, does it necessarily prove that he or she lived here? Or might this be the grave of a passing seafarer whose remains were brought to shore before the ship continued on its way?
It's very exciting being here with archaeologists who are trying to work out what Harris was to the Vikings. As part of the Hebrides, it's on that sea route between Shetland and Orkney in the north and Ireland, places that were all firmly part of the Viking world. But what about Harris? Was it just a stopping off point? Were the Vikings here only transiently? Or did they actually settle here and put down roots, as the place names seem to suggest? Well, they're finding what look like Norse buildings, and we have that piece of steatite as well, which suggests that the archaeologists are just on the brink of finding the first hard evidence of Viking settlement here on Harris.
In England, there's one city that boasts more evidence of Viking occupation than anywhere else in Britain. York, or Jorvik. The first Viking to take the city was Ivar the Boneless, a Danish Viking leader and reputed berserker. Jorvik became the capital of his new Danish territory in 866 AD. For the next 20 years, the Danes continued with their aggressive expansion until the English king, Alfred the Great, drew up a treaty with the Viking king, Guthrum. The country was sliced in two, and the Danes were given their own territory in the north and east, the Danelaw, with York at its heart.
Even though they only ruled here for 100 years, York is very much still associated with the Vikings. And an excavation in the 70s here at Coppergate dragged York's Viking past into the present in a very vivid way. Now all of that archaeology is sealed beneath these shops and cafes, but there's a current excavation going on in another part of the city not far from here, and again we're starting to see the buried history of this city. So I'm going to visit the dig to find out what more we can learn about the Vikings of Jorvik.
Archaeologists have been working in an area called Hungate in the centre of the city for 4.5 years. It's a huge, multi-layered excavation, but right now the archaeologists are almost 3 metres below today's ground level and digging what I'm interested in, the Viking layer. And they're revealing that they were not just about looting and fighting. The Vikings were traders and builders of cities too. Once the Vikings had taken York, they stayed here, bringing up families and blending with the city's previous inhabitants, creating a unique culture known as Anglo-Scandinavian. And they remained even after the last Viking king had been expelled, expanding their town and putting up huge permanent buildings.
So are you into the final phase, really?
Yeah, this is the very final part.
Peter Connolly is running excavations here for the York Archaeological Trust.
It's landscape archaeology, it just happens to be in an urban environment.
Yeah.
Most of the buildings here sit on an organised grid layout, unexpected evidence that the Vikings had a talent for urban planning. The land here slopes gently down to the river, making it an ideal loading and unloading spot. These buildings were probably storage warehouses. And right in the middle of these structures, the Vikings built something that would have been totally indispensable.
The stuff that I'm digging through at the moment is effectively human waste, it's poo. Because what I'm sat in at the moment, it's the remains of a Viking toilet or cesspit. All the bits of animal bone that we're finding in here as well, it's being used as a general rubbish pit as well, although the majority of it is human waste. You are getting other bits and pieces in here as well.
But fortunately, it's not just rubbish that's come out of the ground at Hungate.
Over the 4.5 years that the archaeologists have been working here, they've turned up thousands of artefacts from the Viking period. Most of them are pottery and bone and represent household waste. But there is a handful of intriguing small finds which provide us with additional clues as to what the Vikings were doing in this part of the city.
The finds researcher at York Archaeological Trust is Nikki Rogers.
So, Nikki, this is a collection of finds that are all from that excavation at Hungate.
They are. They're really a fraction of what we've found over the 5 years that we've been excavating there. We've had over 12,000 individual artefacts.
What's this here?
Well, actually, this is a jet pendant. It's quite sweet, I think, because the whole... Well, it's a bit off-centre.
I like the shape of it. I mean, that's quite a modern-looking thing, isn't it?
But that's a very typical shape from that period, in fact.
So where would that have come from, the jet for that, do you think?
Probably from Whitby.
Right.
From the north coast.
Yeah. What about these beads? Are these amber?
No, this is all amber here.
So where would that have come from, that amber,
Well,
do you think?
that's going to have come from the Baltic area.
So the Vikings living in Hungate imported high-quality material. Their trade routes stretched hundreds of miles away across the Scandinavian world. But they also used less exotic material to turn out huge numbers of an item that's a little more surprising.
Well, these are actually skates.
Really?
Yes. They're effectively very easy to make because the bone is already, that size, that shape. Very little has to be done to it to turn.
So what is the bone? This is a metapodial,
yes,
isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's probably they're usually horse or cattle metapodials.
Right. Okay.
All that's been done to this one, if you look at it, is on the bottom it's been flattened and smooth. So that's a very smooth, flat surface.
And that's been deliberately done.
That has been deliberately done. Your foot would have sat on here.
Yeah.
Your heel there, your toe there. You weren't able to take your foot off the ice, so you were pulling yourself along with poles.
So they're not ice dancing, they're not pirouetting round,
No.
They're keeping their feet on the ground and they're using them rather like cross-country skis.
That's it.
These simple bone objects connect us to customs imported from the frozen Norse homelands.
The archaeology of Hungate, the buried evidence of people who lived here in Jorvik 1,000 years ago, is not about monumental remains. We're not looking at the elite of society, but we're getting an insight instead into the lives of ordinary people as they started to plan their town. And we see how they adapted their buildings to suit the land and the specific purpose they wanted them for. These people lived in York, but they kept a connection with their Scandinavian homeland through the objects that they bought, used and wore. And in a very real way, 1,000 years ago, they were laying the foundations of the York that we see today.
While in York, the Vikings and Anglo-Saxons learnt to get along, throughout the rest of England, their relationship remained uneasy. Although pockets of Danes lived and traded here, they hadn't gained a permanent foothold, and full-scale Danish raids continued along the coast. The English king Ethelred the Unready was repeatedly forced to pay them off with huge sums of money, known as Danegeld. And the growing tension between these clashing nations led to a horrific act, the St. Brice's Day massacre. But the perpetrators of this slaughter were not Vikings, they were Anglo-Saxon. And what's more, the murder was sanctioned by King Ethelred. He decreed that
all the Danes who had sprung up in this island, sprouting like cockle amongst the wheat, were to be destroyed by a most just extermination.
Some of the victims of this extermination may now have been discovered by archaeologists in a pit in Oxford. The skeletons of at least 35 people lay in a mass grave where they'd been dumped 1,000 years before.
It is very rare that archaeologists get the chance to examine evidence from a particular historical event, and one that the scholars agree did actually happen. But I'm interested in the analysis of these bones. Do the bones show evidence of violence? Could they indeed represent the victims of this massacre?
Osteologist Kerry Fallis has been examining their remains for signs of trauma.
This was actually the first skeleton that we found, but it wasn't until we placed his skull back together, because it was in hundreds of fragments, that we actually saw the trauma. There's at least 10 blade wounds.
So there's a blade wound here, here, there, so that's 3.
There's a glancing wound here.
And what about these little triangular holes?
They're puncture wounds made by maybe a spear or something like that.
It is awful, isn't it? I mean, you hold these bones, and these are the bones of somebody who died a very long time ago, but you're suddenly kind of connecting with this awful moment, which is his death.
Radiocarbon dating has shown that these people died between 998 and 1019 AD, which means it's possible they were killed on St Brice's Day, 1002, the day the Anglo-Saxons turned on the Danes.
And he also has 2 puncture wounds to his back. There's one there and one a bit farther down.
So these are quite tiny puncture wounds into the spine. What do you think they could have been caused by?
Possibly by a spear, something being thrust rather than thrown.
Yeah, so just the tip of a spear being pushed in. Yeah. Again, a young man hacked to death. Horrendous.
Most of these men were between 16 and 25 years old when they died. Incredibly, the next skeleton I'm shown is that of a man whose murder was even more vicious than the last.
His ear, just behind his ear, has been sheared off.
Oh yeah, so straight through that mastoid process, that chunk of bone behind the ear.
The side of his mandible's been sheared off.
So there's evidence of blade injury here as well?
Yeah, there's 2 definite blade wounds on that side of the jaw. He's got 4 wounds to his upper neck.
So that's been chopped through, yeah.
And the dens itself.
So chopping through just underneath the ear, taking off the angle of the mandible, and then the blade carrying on through and cutting into the vertebrae of the neck.
Yeah.
Other parts of this man's skeleton show further signs of the frenzied nature of the attack.
He has 3 punctures to his pelvis. There's 2 small wounds there, but they've actually come in from the back. You can see these very square-shaped puncture wounds, which have gone all the way through the bone.
So these are the tips of a weapon of some kind, which are pushing all the way through to here.
Yeah.
So he was attacked from the back there, so on the left side, somebody stabbed him just above the hip on the back, and then he's also been speared or stabbed through from the front as well, from about here, going in and then hitting his pelvis as it passes backwards. So he's being attacked from all angles.
All angles.
And if the multiple stab wounds weren't enough to finish this man off, for good measure, he was set on fire.
His forehead has been burnt, which accounts for the missing bone in the middle, and also his hand has been charred.
Is this the only skeleton who has signs of burning?
No, quite a few of them have got charring.
Yeah.
It's mostly to their heads, their pelvises, and their hands.
Terry, were you shocked when you got these bones cleaned up and into the laboratory at how much violence there was represented on them?
Very shocked. I've never seen anything like this before.
Yeah.
And just to have so many different weapons used on one individual.
These skeletons bore none of the wounds you'd expect to find on people who tried to defend themselves, so it's likely that they were murdered whilst running away. But were they Vikings? Isotope analysis was not conclusive, but did show that their diet was rich in seafood, suggesting they did at least live a Viking way of life. And then they may have been hunted down and killed for it.
So what can we say for certain? We have over 30 skeletons, all of them men, all showing signs of extreme violence. Whilst we can't be sure that they were the victims of the St Brice's Day massacre, the types of injury and the date of the skeletons makes it at least possible. These young men were cut down, were hacked to death in a frenzy of violence. And 1,000 years on, this mass murder is still shocking.
Through trauma analysis, archaeology has allowed us to explore the awful possibility of the Vikings as victims. But a different kind of archaeological discovery has opened a window onto life for a Viking whose luck had run out.
Every now and then, metal detectorists turn up interesting objects which have been lost or abandoned or even deliberately buried by their owners, and then they've laid hidden in the ground for hundreds of years. But it's extremely unusual to find a collection as diverse and which illustrates as many different aspects of a past society as the hoard I'm about to see now.
It's one of the most important Viking finds of the last 150 years, and it's so rich in content that experts are still writing up their findings. It's currently on display at the Yorkshire Museum.
So this is it. This is the Vale of York hoard. It was found 4 years ago by a father and son metal detecting team. And it really is an astonishing collection of silver objects with one piece of gold. But what's really amazing is that most of those objects were found inside that cup. It really is spectacular and beautiful, but what I want to know is, can we learn anything of any real archaeological significance from these objects? And given what we know about this period of history in this area, might we be able to get an idea of the person who had this sort of wealth in their possession?
The hoard comprises 617 coins and 67 pieces of silver, including items of jewellery, all objects which have a great deal to tell us about the Scandinavian world at the time of their burial.
This cup is absolutely extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, it's I think probably the finest thing in the hoard, all on its own. It's gilt silver cup, so it's silver and it's been gilded with gold. It was also decorated with niello, which is a kind of alloy that's black. So when this was first made, it would have been, if you think of a wasp, a kind of quite gaudy yellow and black contrast. So the detail would have showed up amazingly well. Would you like to hold it?
I'd love to hold it.
If you sit it in your hands, it kind of gives you a real good impression of what this might have been used for when it was originally made.
It feels like a cup which wants to be passed on to somebody else.
Yeah.
What do you think it was used for?
Given the kind of the way that you hold it in both hands, the fact that it's been gilded and it may have had a lid, we think that it could be an ecclesiastical vessel, something that was used in a monastery.
So it's possible that this cup, which experts believe came from the Frankish Empire, fell into Viking hands as loot or in payment of tribute. It was made in the mid-9th century, predating the rest of the objects in this collection.
But it presumably had a lot of special significance and meaning because it lasted another 100 years, so I presume it was passed down through the family and then came to, hold the contents of this hoard.
This object gives us a rare insight into the mindset of a Viking. As an heirloom, it connects him back to his adventuring ancestors and their ill-gotten gains. But not all of the items in this hoard had sentimental value.
So what about these objects that were inside it then? Are these pieces of jewellery typically Viking in nature?
They are, yes. This is by far the most spectacular.
That's the gold. That's the only gold piece, isn't it?
This is the only gold piece in the hoard. And if you'd like to hold it.
Gosh, that's heavy.
It is. It's quite a chunky thing.
This single piece is a marker of extreme wealth. Finding gold in Viking hoards is exceptionally rare. Only someone of the highest social standing would have had access to it.
And there are some complete items of jewellery, but then there seem to be a lot of
pieces. This bit in particular, I mean, that just looks like a brooch or something that's been cut in half.
And this is very typical of the way the Vikings did things. They had a lot of what we call hack silver.
The Viking economy was based on the barter and exchange of silver. It was highly prized by the Vikings and valued by its weight and purity. Before being chopped up and used as currency, silver could be worn and transported as jewellery.
This is what we call a penannular brooch. If you think of this as the terminal at one end, it would thin out, come in a big spiral, and then fatten out again at the other end.
Right.
And you would have a huge pin through the middle, and that would sit on your cloak to keep your cloak together. And this is a particularly beautiful example. I think it's got these lovely little roundels and it's kind of this really delicate interlaced pattern.
Yeah, and actually it's made of looks like little beasts, which are kind of chasing their tails around.
Very popular in kind of Viking iconography, these little beasties.
The Vikings travelled thousands of miles across vast, sweeping trade routes to get their silver. And some pieces within this hoard connect the Vikings here in Britain with trading centres as far away as the Islamic world. Oh, that looks like Arabic script on there.
It does. This is called a dirham, and it's Islamic coin.
It really is?
It is, and it comes from Afghanistan.
Wow. So this is evidence of Vikings trading all the way over to the Middle East?
Absolutely, yeah.
One other coin here sheds light on the moment this hoard was buried. It's a coin of the English King Athelstan, minted in 927 AD, just after he captured York from the Vikings. And judging by the lack of wear on its surface, it was placed in the ground almost immediately.
And if you look very closely, you'll be able to see that this coin actually has the words Rex To Brie. So R-E-X-T-O-B-R-I-E.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
That basically means King of all Britain. So this coin proclaims Athelstan as the King of all Britain. So he used this coin to say that he'd got rid of the Vikings and he'd unified the country and made it into one kingdom.
But although the English king stamped his identity on his coins, the name of the person who owned these riches is lost to us. All we have are the clues passed down by his cherished possessions. This hoard of beautiful objects raises the tantalising possibility that what we're looking at is the treasure, the life savings of a man whose days amongst the ruling classes in northern England are numbered. And the hoard dates from precisely the time when there's this changeover of power between the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons. So are we looking at a Viking running away and burying his wealth for safety? All that we can be sure about is that he never returned to dig it up. Govan in Glasgow might seem like an unlikely place to come looking for Viking archaeology, but I'm here to see what is perhaps the most extensive collection of Norse artefacts from any Viking site anywhere in rural Britain. Now, these objects are not treasure, they are domestic items, things that Viking men and women would have used every day of their lives. And they're also at the beginning of their story because they've been excavated, but the examination, the interpretation of them is very much still a work in progress. So what I want to find out is the potential of this collection for helping us understand Viking everyday life.
The actual material is fine, but as you see from the package...
Beverly Ballin-Smith has a huge archaeological task ahead of her, the processing and recording of all the small finds from a site called the Udal in North Uist, the largest Norse settlement ever to have been excavated in the Western Isles. It was a monumental project which involved a dedicated group of volunteers who returned to dig again and again over a 30-year period starting in 1963. But the significance of the site is still only partially understood. I don't think I have ever seen so many bone needles, and I imagine we're just starting.
So, you wanted to have a look at...
that little poppy one?
Yeah, sure.
Can we take it out?
Yeah. Want to?
Oh, look at that. That's really lovely. What are these made of?
I think that's a bird bone. It's pretty, isn't it?
It's really lovely, yeah. There are hundreds of decorated bone pins here, perhaps a reflection of their value in everyday life as something to fix a Viking's hair in place or to fasten his cloak. That's fantastic.
In a sense, all these are lost objects.
Yes, things that have just dropped off people.
Dropped off people and not...
And they go, where did that go? And they've trod it into the mud, and then archaeologists find it centuries later. Wow. It's not unusual to find combs in a Viking settlement. They're commonplace personal objects. What's surprising about this collection, though, is the sheer number of them found on one site. Oh, that's fantastic. It's got a little animal on it.
A little horse's head, I think.
And I love these roundels, which are obviously kind of drilled into the bone. I think you look at things like this and you have this immediate contact with somebody who lived centuries ago and this was their comb. And you also know that you have the same kind of sensibilities that, you know, I quite like to have things that are nice. I like to have objects which aren't just functional, but actually which are quite attractive as well.
Yes.
The massive task of excavating this site and all the finds buried there was effectively the life's work of historian and archaeologist Ian Crawford. But unable to continue with his task due to ill health, it's now fallen to Beverley. But he ended up amassing a huge collection of finds that you're still looking through now. So he obviously became... what happened? Did he become overwhelmed with the amount he was finding?
I've been there myself. When you work on a massive site with complicated stratigraphy. So he carried on digging. He produced interim reports for every year that he dug. But then there's the next stage of actually writing up and getting the information out to the public. And I think he was simply overwhelmed.
Even since my visit, fresh research has suggested the volume of beautiful combs may be proof of a Viking comb-making industry here. It reinforces just how important the research into the Udall will be in years to come. It's great to see just a small part of this massive collection of everyday objects. They seem mundane in some ways, but they also show that just like us, the Vikings like to have nice things. And it's fantastic that this collection is being revisited. Archaeologically speaking, there's still an enormous amount to be learned about this site and all the artefacts it contained. And there must be people on North Uist who remember digging at that site in the dunes. And I imagine it's important to them to know that the last chapters in the story of Udall are finally being written. Off the northeastern shore of Scotland lie the islands of Orkney, colonised by the Vikings in the 9th century. Sailing from their Norwegian homelands, it would have taken the Norse longships about a day to get here. And when they settled for good, the islands became the centre of Norse power in Scotland, right up until 1469. The last bastion of Scandinavian authority in Britain. Today, these islands are home to a classic Norse archaeological find and also to new excavations that are offering tantalising glimpses of the Vikings in Scotland. My first destination is the dig currently taking place in the east of Orkney's mainland, near its ancient capital, Kirkwall. It sits on top of a 30-metre-high stack of sheer rock, the Broch of Dearness, which even today is challenging to access. This is such a wild place. There's nothing here but cliffs, sea and birds. And I'm walking up this path that I can't imagine was here 1,000 years ago. So I do wonder how people got across from the land there to the Broch. This is such an exposed place. It's a lovely day today, but imagine this on a rainy, windswept day. The Broch is totally exposed to the legendary Orcadian winds. What an extreme place to choose as your home. Whether coming from the mainland or from ships secured in a nearby bay, getting here can't have been straightforward. The old path up the Broch has disappeared into the sea.
So we're now coming up through the original entrance to the site.
Exactly.
Can we go and have a look at
of course we can.
some of the archaeology that you're exploring?
There was once a settlement of around 30 Viking houses up here, and Dr. James Barrett and his team are excavating one of them this season.
So would this have been the original doorway?
This is the original doorway of the phase that we're excavating right now. So there was a settlement here before the Vikings came, and the ground level at that point was at the top of that layer. And then the Viking Age houses were literally dug into the ground and lined with stone walls, what you see here. And then above that, at ground level, the rest of the house would have been built in turf and timber.
It's likely that the Vikings dug their homes so deep into the ground to withstand the extreme winds that often blow here. And evidence of life inside one of those homes came to light during my visit.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness.
Right, so we're just going to come in here and
That's just beautiful.
It's moments like these that make archaeology so rewarding, discovering an unexpected find, a forgotten part of somebody's life.
If we start cleaning off most of this loose around it.
That's fantastic. This is just brilliant. This is a Viking gaming board that was thrown away, that was thrown into this rubbish pit, this midden, that we've just found in the corner of the trench. And it's wonderful to hold something that was obviously a very personal object to somebody, something that they would have enjoyed using 1,000 years ago.
It looks like a board for playing the popular Viking game Nefertafel. It's something that might have kept people occupied in place of looking after crops or farming animals, a task that would have been impossible up here. So their food must have been brought in from other farms or settlements nearby, and only someone of the higher status could have demanded this of their neighbours, perhaps a Viking chief and his retinue. But it does beg the question, why live in such a difficult spot?
The way it works is what you see. It's a site that is all about seeing and being seen. And when people ask me why were they here, when I want to give a glib answer, it's to make a point. It gives you extraordinary control of the maritime vantage. And in addition to that, you will be seen. So if you imagine a large hall here, then if you're coming into the archipelago, you immediately know who you have to go and talk to. You know who's boss.
I am quite taken by this ancient cliff-top settlement. It seems such an extraordinary place to live, so wild and windy, with these crashing waves all around. The men and women who lived up here must have been very isolated in some ways, but on the other hand, they can't have survived here on their own. They depended on support from people living on mainland Orkney. But who were they?
One of the reasons the Vikings seem so mysterious is that they left few written records in Britain. But it's wrong to think they didn't write. They used runes. And last year, James found a tiny bronze strip with a mysterious message etched into its surface. Professor John Hines examined it to see if he could make some sense of it.
Takes quite a while getting used to it, but once you get your eye in to these things, you start seeing certain letters that we're familiar with. So if you look on it here, we've got, see that letter like that? That's fairly clear. Then there's a very clearly what we'd call an I, then another K, then we've got an U at the end of that.
Some letters in the Scandinavian runic alphabet resemble our own, and others are more cryptic. To make it even more difficult, they changed over time, and experts continue to discover new letters and symbols.
Unfortunately, going across all of the bits that I can read, I just cannot put enough together to form a coherent words and coherent strings of words. Interestingly, practically every mark that we've got on that we can identify as being the sort of things they were using as runes. They've abbreviated what they're writing, rather like people who are younger than me do when they send text messages, and I try and work out what they're actually saying there.
It's frustrating to be so close and yet so far away from knowing what's been written down by this Viking living on the Broch of Dyrness. A message from Scandinavian Orkney that we'll probably never decipher.
The Norse archaeology I've seen in Orkney has shown me some of the purest evidence of that culture, because when the Vikings came here, they transplanted their entire way of life from Norway.
And this year's research has unearthed unexpected evidence of this Viking lifestyle, of how they settled and shaped our landscape as well as raiding here. Evidence like the ivory chessman, carved in a Norwegian workshop, tangible proof of a wealthy, forgotten kingdom. The buried life savings of a powerful Viking whose wealth connects us to vast trading empires. And the horrific St. Brice's Day massacre, when men may have been killed just for being Scandinavian.
Through its invaders, Britain became firmly connected with the continent and beyond. And archaeology helps us understand how these outsiders came and enriched our culture and ended up becoming British. And so the digging continues.
We might be a small island, but we've got a big history. Everywhere you stand, there are worlds beneath your feet. And so every year, hundreds of archaeologists across Britain go looking for more clues into our story. Who lived here, when and how.
There's a blade wound here, here, so he's being attacked from all angles.
Archaeology is a complex jigsaw puzzle, drawing everything together from skeletons to swords, temples to treasure.
He's biting his shield.
Biting his shield, yeah.
From Orkney to Devon, we're joining this year's quest on sea, land and air. We share all of the questions and find some of the answers as we join the teams in the field, digging for Britain.
Our written history doesn't begin until the Roman invasion, but for about 2,500 years before that, the people of Britain living through the Bronze and the Iron Ages were producing beautiful, intricate pieces of metalwork, like this fantastic gold torque, which does suggest that the culture of prehistoric Britain was more sophisticated than we might sometimes imagine.
Metal is at the heart of the ages of bronze and iron, but there's much more to pre-Roman Britain than that. This year's archaeology gives us incredible glimpses into a world that's unfamiliar, complex, and sometimes very strange. Like the Bronze Age skeletons changing our understanding of prehistoric death rituals.
This is starting to look very strange indeed.
And the mysterious monument emerging from the mud where it's lain for 2 millennia.
Oh, that's just amazing.
The Britain we know is not a place our Bronze Age ancestors would recognise. When the era began in around 2300 BC, much of this land was covered in forest. Bronze Age people changed the landscape. They used the first metal tools, cleared forests, and lived in settled communities. The population rose to around 500,000 people. Their lives are still mysterious to us, but each year, archaeology reveals more surprising evidence. This year's revelations begin at a site uncovered between 1989 and 2002. The University of Sheffield were digging on the Hebridean island of South Uist. They were excavating a terrace of Bronze Age houses. Under the floors, they discovered something quite unexpected: human remains. They were buried with their arms and legs bent and drawn up in a recognised early Bronze Age style known as a crouched burial. Complete Bronze Age skeletons are rare, so this was already the find of a lifetime. The bones were brought to Sheffield for examination. This was the beginning of a long investigation that now suggests Bronze Age attitudes to death were far stranger and more complex than we had ever imagined.
Now, this might not look quite as exciting as visiting a dig, but so much of the information that we can glean from archaeology comes not just from the excavation itself, but from looking at artefacts and bones later on in the laboratory. And as a human bone expert, I'm really excited about looking at this particular collection of skeletons, which have the potential for revolutionising our ideas about life and death in the Bronze Age. And I think I press this button. I'm in.
Osteoarchaeologist Christy Willis has been part of the Cladh Hallan project since 2004.
So this is your lab?
Yeah, and here we have the two main skeletons from Cladh Hallan laid out on the table for us.
We're starting with the male.
Looks nicely preserved.
He's very nicely preserved.
This appears to be a normal adult skeleton, but a closer look reveals it's anything but.
Take a look at this jaw. What we can see is the occlusal surface itself, which is the top part of the teeth. It's actually quite worn down.
Yep, okay, so the grinding surface of the teeth is, yeah, I'd agree with that, certainly quite worn.
But if we look at his top teeth, they're actually all missing.
All the molars have gone,
Yes.
and not only have they gone, they went a long time ago.
Yes, because of all the antemolar tooth loss, exactly.
The upper and lower jaws seem to be a mismatch. It's hard to see how the lower teeth would have become so worn down if the upper teeth were missing. Christy suspects that this skeleton is more than one man. To see if this strange discovery was a one-off, she turned her attention to the female.
This is a beautifully female pelvis, isn't it?
It is. It's really nice. It has a very wide obtuse sciatic notch there, typical female traits. But the skull, osteologically, is male.
How very strange.
It has a very large occipital protuberance at the back here.
But that to me wouldn't immediately make me think this was from a different skeleton. I think, okay, this is a female, because we'd go with the pelvis as the main indicator, but a woman who looked a bit manly, perhaps.
That's exactly right. But in this instance, because I knew what we had with the skeleton behind us, I felt more research was necessary.
In the case of the second skeleton, just looking at the bones wasn't enough. To investigate whether it too was made up of more than one person, Christy arranged for some of the bones to be tested for DNA.
And what were the results?
We have 3 individuals here.
This is starting to look very strange indeed. So
Exactly.
if there are 3 individuals, which bones belong to each individual?
All right, so we have the male skull, and then we have a female pelvis. And then we have the humerus here has been tested, and that's a different individual again. That's giving a different aDNA haplotype reading.
Right.
Close examination suggests that both these skeletons are made up of the bones of at least 3 different people. As far as the team knows, these are the first examples of complete British Bronze Age skeletons constructed from the remains of multiple individuals. But this extraordinary discovery is only part of the Cladh Hallan mystery.
For the next stage of the investigation, I've come to meet Professor Mike Parker-Pearson. He's one of Britain's foremost experts on both the Bronze Age and on burial archaeology. So I'm delighted to be meeting him to talk about those very odd Cladh Hallan burials.
Mike asked his team to take their examination inside the bones. Normally, once bacteria have moved in, decay spreads through the skeleton. Sections of the Cladh Hallan bones, though, revealed that this process had suddenly halted.
So what we've got is actually decay starting, but instead of reaching out through the whole bone, it's being stopped. And that's the really exciting thing, because that's one of the key indicators that we're looking at preservation of soft tissue at some time soon after death.
The evidence suggested that the Cladh Hallan bodies had not decayed normally. The bones were found buried in shell sand, but looked as though they'd been in a much more acidic environment. The environment of South Uist includes acidic peat bogs. The preservative qualities of peat prevent decay in organic material like human tissue. Mike's final conclusion was extraordinary. The Cladh Hallan bodies had been deliberately put into peat for long enough to mummify them. His team had discovered Britain's first Bronze Age mummies.
So you were surprised?
To put it mildly, if anyone had asked me, I would have just dismissed it and said complete fantasy.
Yeah.
And even when we came up with our results initially, some people were very sceptical. But the great thing is we've had many years now to actually work on this and demonstrate it beyond doubt.
Mike doesn't believe the mummies were buried immediately, but rather kept above ground to play a part in society.
The whole point is that you mummify because you actually want the mummies to continue to play a role among the living.
The mummies may have been made into composites of different individuals, either long before or immediately prior to burial. Mike thinks they could have been used as ancestor figures, perhaps to provide the community with advice.
This is actually them figuring out what happens when you die. It isn't the end. There's something beyond, but it's also a series of quite complicated states of being. Alive, not quite alive, and finally fully dead.
This investigation is still unfolding. It seems unlikely that the people of South Uist were alone in making mummies. So Mike's asked his team to begin to examine bone sections from some of Britain's other crouched burials. One of the first comes from Cambridgeshire, far from the Hebrides. Analysis of the bone's interior revealed that decay had started and then stopped. A very similar pattern to the Cladh Hallan mummies. This stage of the project is still in its infancy. The aim is to discover if the evidence from other crouched burials suggests they were also mummified, and whether mummies were part of life across Bronze Age Britain.
I have always been intrigued by these Bronze Age crouched burials, and it now seems that we have real evidence that at least some of them may have been mummified. This is like a forensic case. You found a body and you have to work out how it's got there. You have to work out the processes it's gone through before it was buried in the ground and you found it. And how extraordinary that we can use these modern scientific techniques to unlock secrets from bodies that have been buried for thousands of years.
Bronze Age people altered their landscape by building permanent settlements, but their Britain was still much wilder than ours. In one corner of the country, archaeology is helping to recreate an environment they would recognise.
This might look like the surface of Mars, but in fact, I'm in the middle of the Cambridgeshire countryside, and this is a massive quarry providing gravel for the construction industry.
Not long ago, this was farmland. But before that, this landscape was part of the Cambridgeshire wetlands. In prehistory, these wetlands supported both people and wildlife. Quarrying began in 1997.
Once the quarrying is over, the level of the land here will really be too low to make it useful for agriculture. But that is very good news for the wildlife, because this whole area will be returned to wetland, so a very similar environment to what was here in the Bronze Age.
The work of the Cambridge Archaeological Unit is informing the recreation of these wetlands. Working ahead of the quarry, the archaeologists have now surveyed and excavated 1,000 acres of land. The evidence they've uncovered shows us how our prehistoric ancestors used their environment to survive.
Well, it's nice that the material we've been getting out from the lake, I mean, we're getting a nice kind of resonance in terms of what we're finding on the sites. It's still early days, but one of the nicest finds is this piece of wood is actually been gnawed by beavers. You can tell their tooth marks are quite distinct. One can almost relate them in this case, for this is one of the beaver jaws. So, you know, we know the beavers were here in Willingham Mere in the later Bronze Age and Iron Age, and we know they're being exploited. Lots of arrowheads like this from the early Bronze Age. They were hunting, there's no doubt about that.
Here at the Unearthed Nature Reserve, the quarrying has ended and the process of rebuilding the wetlands has already begun, managed by the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. Further archaeological discoveries show that beavers share this landscape, with creatures so exotic we'd never imagine them living in Britain.
This is Dalmatian pelican bone.
Wow, massive.
This was a huge bird. It had a wingspan of about three metres overall. You can see that where the feathers were fixed along the bone there.
Oh, that's just extraordinary. There are these bumps all along the surface of the bone. This is absolutely massive. I mean, that's so much longer than my ulna in my forearm.
In Europe, Dalmatian pelicans only survive today in large wetlands, like Romania's Danube Delta. But by reinstating the reed beds at Ouse Fen, the RSPB has already attracted back some of the smaller birds that once lived here.
Do you think a Bronze Age person sitting right where we are now would recognise this landscape?
I think they would. I think they would, absolutely, because we've actually produced a diversity. We've got grassland, we've got reed here, we've got cattle grazing, we've got birdsong in the background. I feel we've almost made it.
We're back in the Bronze Age.
The Cambridge team will be digging ahead of the quarry for many more years. Their excavations have produced tens of thousands of finds, helping to build up a detailed picture of everyday life right back through the Bronze Age. Each object has to be carefully cleaned and catalogued. This huge task belongs to finds supervisor Dr. Jason Hawkes.
It's simply a matter of just very gently probing any obvious areas of surfaced dirt. So there we are. It's a very slow, painstaking process.
Oh, there's little bits of it. Yeah, there we go. Little bits of soil coming off there. It's quite nerve-wracking.
No, it is.
Bronze axes like this were more resilient and better for woodworking than the stone tools that went before. The finds here aren't just practical, though. They include personal objects that connect us directly to prehistoric people.
Well, these are quite interesting. You can see that all of these shells have been perforated, all in exactly the same place on the shell on this.
So, I mean, presumably they were strung, they were suspended.
Yes.
And they might have been jewellery.
There might have been a necklace.
Yeah. I still go to beaches today and pick up shells and try and make necklaces out of them.
Yeah.
It seems extraordinary that so much concrete evidence of our ancestors' lives has been preserved and painstakingly identified.
Now, what about these little lumps of clay? Is it lumps of clay you've got there?
Yeah, so these are...
Now, why are these important?
Well, these are really, really very intriguing. If you look very carefully, you can actually see the faintest of impressions of textile on the original surface of that piece of clay.
That's amazing. That almost looks like Hessian sacking. It's that kind of appearance.
This imprint is the ghost of a Bronze Age fabric, perhaps even clothing, preserved for millennia.
It's these traces, these amorphous, lasting traces of somebody going about their day-to-day life that I think really does just make you sit back and think, wow, you know, that's such a real point of connection with somebody that was living 4,000 years ago.
Makes all those hours of cataloguing worth it.
It does, it does, almost, yeah.
The excavations here have revealed evidence not only of the people who lived here during prehistoric times, but of an entire vanished world. Just imagine pelicans flying over these wetlands in a landscape that our Bronze Age ancestors would recognise.
The Bronze Age began with the arrival of metal from continental Europe by sea. European metal has been discovered in East Anglia, so the Waveney River may have been one of the early routes by which goods were brought into Britain. The trade in metal and other commodities would continue into the Iron Age. For the past 5 years, a team from the University of Birmingham has dug alongside the Waveney River. What they're uncovering is not metal, but a series of vast and mysterious timber structures. It's likely these structures were built partly because of the importance of the river trade. But they also give us an insight into the complex beliefs of our ancestors.
What makes this excavation so exciting is that this is a wetland site. So we have organic remains preserved here, the sort of things which just wouldn't stick around in any dry land archaeological site. And crucially, the team are finding wood which has been preserved for thousands of years. And today they're hoping to actually extract some of that wood.
Prehistoric people built trackways across Britain, but rivers were an easier way to move goods around. Dr. Henry Chapman is taking me to the site by this ancient route.
We're getting evidence now of quite complex boats. We also have evidence for quite basic boats. So the way I imagine it is you've got people sort of bobbing around on everything from coracles to dugouts, and then you have your posh person who's got their lovely sewn plank wonder boat. So yeah, I think a real variety. I think it's populated. You see a landscape like this and there are people here and you'd know it.
The structures appear to date from the Iron Age, when this land lay within the territory of the Iceni tribe. The evidence that's emerging shows they put enormous effort into building these ostentatious constructions to impress traders and other travellers.
So what would a trader in prehistoric times have seen as they came up this river?
That'd be weird, wouldn't it? If you imagine your first time you come up, it's sort of it's badlands as you're coming up the river, and occasionally there'd be gaps in the vegetation, and you'd be seeing these long lines of very unnatural timbers. Huge posts, standing above the ground, probably 2 or 3 metres above ground, which is a massive statement, really. It's completely over-engineered. It's far too much effort for anything which is vaguely practical alone. So yeah, it would have been quite strange. You would know that you'd arrived somewhere.
This is what the traders might have seen. Tracks that ran for up to 1/3 of a mile, flanked by rows of massive oak posts. As you'd expect, these were probably pathways across boggy land. But in prehistory, man-made structures like this would also have been an extraordinary and impressive sight. There is no written record of their existence. Without archaeology, we wouldn't know they were here. Dr. Ben Geary is in charge of lifting the posts.
As you can see, we've got some really highly technical and very expensive equipment to lift this post out. There's nothing very glamorous about getting one of these posts out of the ground, as you're going to see.
Right. The timber has only survived because it was sealed in waterlogged peat. On other sites, it would have rotted away.
Good.
It's certainly wobbling. It's like a tooth that wants to come out.
Ready, Mike?
Grab the rope. That's not budging.
This is no easy task. The builders carved the posts into sharp pencil points.
Exciting and nerve-wracking at the same time.
Then drove them deep into the mud.
Oh, is it moving? Is it moving?
Is that coming, Chris?
I don't know. Yep, it is.
Yep.
Here
it comes. Oh my goodness.
That's it. That's it.
This way, yeah, towards this way.
Look at that! You can see where it's been shaped. That's beautiful. Look at that, that's just amazing. And that's hard timber.
Often the only evidence of prehistoric metalwork is the tools themselves. But through this unusual preservation, we can see how our ancestors used metal to build these remarkable constructions around 2,000 years ago.
It's just amazing how fresh this looks, and because it's worked in a fairly crude way, you can identify individual axe marks on it.
Yeah, I mean, you can see this, if you like, sort of individual moments in time, you know, that process, and you can see in your mind's eye, or I can see in my mind's eye at least, you know, you can see someone sort of crouched over the wood, you know, working away with a tool, and that's why wetland sites are you know, really so important, because you see that human detail in the nature of the tool marks and the woodworking.
The evidence the team have uncovered suggests that these structures were made up of hundreds of posts. And it tells us how our ancestors used metal tools to transform the natural landscape into a man-made environment that was a statement of territory and identity.
I can just imagine this field as a prehistoric construction site. They would have cleared any trees that were in their way and then hauled in these massive pieces of timber. You can imagine the sounds of the metal axes ringing out and instructions being shouted. So this was a massive undertaking. It would have required the efforts of the entire community.
Many different goods were traded in prehistory, but metal had a particular importance. To gain a deeper understanding of our ancestors' minds, we need to know why metal was so much more than just a material for making tools. Norwich Museum have lent us some Bronze Age metal objects discovered in East Anglia.
One of my favourites here is this lovely axe, this early Bronze Age axe, which was, it's not a native design.
So where might that have come from?
It's from Germany, so it's imported, so we know there's trade going on, and we know that people who are living in this area were, from the early Bronze Age, at least trading with continental Europe.
In the Bronze Age, people used metal to express status. Its value was as much symbolic as practical.
You look at this beautiful torque. This material, the actual gold, probably comes from Ireland. It could be imported as a raw material, or it could be as a finished object.
That's beautiful. There is something weird going on with metal during this time, isn't there?
Well, a lot of things are being traded, but metal's just really special. It requires a weird understanding of technology and sort of alchemy almost to actually create something from a rock.
It must have seemed like such a magical thing to be able to extract this kind of very different material from stone.
No, absolutely, and I think it's also unlike anything you can create naturally.
It seems that Bronze and Iron Age people believed that metal had otherworldly qualities. They used metal objects like these to make religious offerings, often burying them near water or placing them directly in it. Henry thinks that water was spiritually significant.
Water is special. It's neither this world or a different world. And the surface of the water is kind of a metaphor for it. So you can see through it, sort of, and as you deposit something, you can sort of see it go into this other world and become hidden beneath the peat. And I think that's probably quite a sort of magical process.
Metal had multiple values. Henry believes the same is true for those vast timber monuments. They were stunning structures to impress traders, practical pathways, and spiritual gathering places by the river.
Water was really important to those prehistoric people in a way that it's really difficult to get at and properly understand. We know that they put offerings very deliberately into water. And here we are as modern archaeologists looking at a site where water is helping us get in touch with our ancestors. It's the very nature of the waterlogged, peaty soil which preserves their wooden constructions so brilliantly.
The Bronze Age became the Iron Age in about 700 BC. Iron was stronger than bronze. With iron-tipped ploughs, heavy soil could be cultivated. Our ancestors used this new metal to create more farmland turning Britain into an increasingly man-made landscape. Archaeology shows there were 3 big sources of iron: the Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire, the Weald in Kent, and the Jurassic Ridge of Leicestershire. Excavations at Borough Hillfort near Leicester are producing evidence that tells us how iron changed the lives of ordinary people.
Antiquarians and archaeologists have been studying hill forts for at least 150 years. But in the past, people have tended to concentrate on the great earth ramparts, the earthworks around the outside. Whereas now, archaeologists are starting to focus on what's going on inside the hill forts, trying to work out what Iron Age people actually used them for.
There were over 3,000 hill forts of different types across Britain. Borough was built in around 500 BC. It served a farming community of up to 5,000 people.
It's a chance to find out something more about these massive features in our landscape, which are at once so familiar but so enigmatic.
The excavation is being run by the University of Leicester. John Thomas is digging what's been called a guard's chamber, perhaps used to control access to the fort entrance. In the Iron Age, it would have looked very different.
You've got 2 massive stone-built walls coming all the way in, so it would have been a very imposing entrance passage.
Yeah.
What we've found here,
So this is the wall here,
the very
is it?
base of the wall.
Yeah.
You can see really nice facing stones here, dry stone wall. But originally, we think that this wall would have stood at least as high as this.
Right up there?
If not higher. And
Oh, really?
then with a timber palisade on top.
Yeah. It's just fantastic revealing it, isn't it? Because you suddenly realise that underneath all these smoothed contours, when this was new, it would have been much more angular. It would have looked like a medieval castle.
Yeah, upright, imposing and very showy.
Just like a medieval castle, Borough would have towered over the landscape, a safe haven in times of trouble. But the artefacts John and the team have uncovered make it clear that the hill fort played a much wider role for the community than just this.
We're getting some idea of the types of things that happened in here. What we've got mostly is evidence of weaving, and there's these interesting worked bones. They've been perforated, presumably for suspension at some point, but they're also highly polished at one end. They're probably big bodkin-type needles or something like that.
Oh, that's lovely.
We've also got evidence for different craft activities, and the main other activity that seems to have been taking place is metalworking. We've got this fantastic punch here. Somebody would have been hammering the end to punch holes through sheet metal, that kind of thing.
Well, I think that would have been pretty effective.
I reckon so.
You don't expect to find metalworking in a guard's chamber, but this new evidence suggests that in times of peace, this was a workshop providing tools for the community.
Right, so what are we doing? Just cleaning?
Yeah, just sort of troweling back gently.
This excavation will run every summer for 5 years, allowing the archaeologists to build a more complete picture of how our ancestors used hill forts. Just outside the ramparts, they're digging a group of roundhouses where some of Borough's farming families may have lived.
This would have been a big roundhouse, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the interior of this building is about 8.5, nearly 9 metres across.
How many people do you think would have lived in a building like this?
We're probably looking at a situation of a single extended family, so anywhere between half a dozen and perhaps 15 people could quite easily live in a house of this size.
With iron tools, Britain could produce more food. By the end of the Iron Age, archaeologists believe the population had grown to around 1 million. The team have discovered several rotary quernstones for grinding flour. Iron helped make them more efficient than simple Bronze Age querns.
So this is an absolutely wonderful thing and a great bit of technology.
This spigot is the key.
Hole drilled in the bottom stone, iron spike, which centres the top stone over it. Absolutely crucial, because if you try and use a rotary quern without it, of course, it'll off-centre very quickly and you simply couldn't use it.
They've also discovered an iron blade. Simple tools like this transformed agriculture.
That's a very nice piece.
So what might the handle have been made of?
Possibly wooden handle, bone, but also antler. The idea with the blade is, of course, you can then sit the handle in
Slot
that
it in.
and the rivet holds it into place.
It almost feels like it's some kind of industrial revolution that, you know, they've discovered this fantastic new hard metal and then they're just thinking, well, what on earth could we do with it?
That certainly seems to be the case, although it certainly doesn't happen overnight. This is really more about increasing and improving agricultural innovations associated with the arable harvest and with feeding that ever-increasing population.
I think that by the time we get to the Iron Age, we still see some aspects of life that seem very foreign to us. But on the other hand, there are things, and particularly the objects they were using on a day-to-day basis, that seem very familiar. And that's because they have this new material that we know from our lives. Here's an iron knife blade. Now, this is a familiar object to us. It's not a world away from the knife you're using to eat your dinner with.
When hill forts were built between 900 and 100 BC, Britain had no sense of itself as a united island. But strong regional identities and tribal groups began to emerge. Some experts believe that population growth put pressure on resources, which led to violent raids between these communities. 70 miles northwest of Borough, a dig at another important hill fort called Finn Cop has revealed powerful evidence for this. The fort lies in the bucolic Peak district of Derbyshire.
Finn Cop Hill Fort is a much-loved beauty spot, but archaeologists and locals wanted to find out more about its history, so an application was made to dig through part of its ditch.
Sort of wedged in there. Yeah.
Excavations began in 2009, led by Dr. Clive Woodington. What he discovered was shocking in the extreme, evidence of an Iron Age massacre.
Now, we found the first body about here. The head was twisted to one side. One arm was behind, one arm in front. Just over here, we got another adult woman. We opened a second trench and we found evidence for another 5 bodies.
In total, Clive and his team unearthed the remains of 9 people. To piece together a fuller picture of what happened at Finn Cop, the next stage was a thorough examination of those skeletons. These are the bones of a teenager, probably a boy. Analysis has revealed that his skull was cut by a sharp blade, like a sword. The wound had never healed, so it must have happened around the time of his death. Other members of the group also show signs of similar injuries.
This is the body of an adult woman. She's about 20 to 30 years old. And she's quite interesting because on her left cuneiform, which is a foot bone, we can see this really quite clear cut mark caused by a sharp-bladed instrument. So this would have been from the inside of the foot. Quite an unusual injury, but it's possible that she was running away with her leg trailing and that they've caught her on the back of her foot, or well, the inside of her foot as she's been running.
After the group came under attack, their bodies were hurled into the ditch of the fort and the stone ramparts thrown down on top of them. The group includes 4 tiny babies, 2 so young they may have still been in the womb, the others aged 8 to 11 months.
So this is one of the collarbones we can see here to give you some sense of size of it. So really very small individuals. And these would have been dispatched as well, along with the adults.
These people and their fort date to around 400 BC, about the middle of the Iron Age. Results from the excavation suggest the fort was attacked while still being built and was never completed.
The motivation for building this fort is something that we can only guess at, but the fact that it was unfinished and that the fort was attacked really quite quickly after they'd started building it does suggest that it was being thrown up quickly in advance of a threat that they perceived was coming their way.
The dig only covered a small section of the ditch. Clive thinks further excavation would reveal more skeletons.
Hill forts played multiple roles as expressions of prestige and as gathering places for the community. But the evidence from a place like Fincop also reminds us that they were defensive and that violence was a part of Iron Age life.
In 43 AD, the Romans invaded, sweeping through tribal territories and taking many into their vast empire. Now, excavations at Cladh near Reading are changing our perception of life in Britain before the Romans came.
These are amongst the most complete Roman town walls that we have in Britain. And today I'm looking out over green fields, but had I been here in the Roman period, all of that would have been a busy, bustling town. The archaeologists here are digging down through the Roman layers to find the Iron Age town that lies beneath them. And they may also have uncovered evidence of British resistance to the Roman occupation.
Cladh was built in the 1st century BC, perhaps 100 years before the Roman invasion. The University of Reading has been excavating here since the 1970s. This year, 250 archaeologists, students and volunteers are on site for 6 weeks. This is excavation on a grand scale, but some of the most exciting finds are absolutely tiny. Lisa Lodwick runs the team that processes all of the samples coming out of Cladh's wells.
We're ready to go, so now we just need to turn the pump on.
This flotation tank is designed to pick up minuscule organic remains like plant seeds, which would never be spotted in normal excavation.
As we break up the sample, hopefully more bits will come to the surface.
What's that there? Is that something?
I think that's a grain. It looks maybe like, if you're very careful. Yeah, I think that looks probably like a barley grain.
Really?
I think so.
How fantastic.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of micro-archaeology.
Yeah,
isn't it?
definitely.
Lisa specialises in archaeobotany, and she's been working on the Iron Age samples emerging from this site for 2 years. By collecting and analysing plant remains, she can begin to work out what the ancient Cladhans were eating. This work has produced some quite unexpected results.
These are dated to about AD 30 to AD 43. So we've got a seed of coriander.
Wow.
And a few seeds of celery.
So pre-Roman coriander.
Basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, these are really exciting because they're now the earliest records of these in the country.
In the whole of the UK?
Basically, yeah.
That's just brilliant.
So
it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, there are all these plants that we think only reached Britain when the Romans arrived.
But actually they got here a few decades before.
Yeah.
And see if we can get anything else,
Gravel.
A lot of household waste ended up in the town wells. So this process picks up all sorts of small but important finds.
Oh,
so you
I missed that.
Come to recognise all the small bits work.
Oh, look at this bit. Oh, wow. Oh, that's fantastic. It's got a really beautiful pattern on it. Can you see these lines, these grooves, and then there's a kind of zigzag pattern
just punched into it. That's really pretty. It's a tiny little fragment that's been missed in the excavation, but then it's picked up through wet sieving.
Pre-Roman Caliva covered 87 acres. This trench represents just 1%. On the left, the archaeologists are digging the Iron Age layers. On the right, early Roman. Field School Director Amanda Clark has clear evidence to show that Iron Age Calivans led sophisticated lives before the Romans invaded.
This is very, very typical Roman ware, Samian, found in a well of Iron Age date here. I mean, you can see they are little drinking vessels. So, you know, they're quite posh, you know, almost look like fine dining, but, you know, we are in the 1st century BC. And the thing about them is that the base of them, they have the maker's stamp. So the potters who actually made these little vessels.
So you can tell exactly where they came from.
Yes, you can.
Until these discoveries, we just didn't believe Iron Age people enjoyed such a refined way of life. These platters were imported from France. They are beautiful, but also mass-produced and affordable.
These aren't barbarians that we're looking at in any shape or form. No. These are people who are drinking out of lovely wine cups and eating off plates.
That's right. I think, you know, they recognised nice things and they wanted the nice things, and they've adopted and adapted them.
Pre-Roman Caliva was a wealthy town. It was also carefully planned. Here, archaeologists have uncovered the first evidence to show that Britons developed urban planning before Roman occupation.
We're actually walking on a lane I would think that was established maybe as early as the 1st century BC, but perhaps, you know, early centuries of the 1st century AD. And
is this what you expect to find on an Iron Age site? A lane with a, you know, a proper gravelly surface to it, and it's running in a straight line. It seems a bit Roman to me.
It was an amazing surprise to find such an ordered layout.
The excavations here are revealing a quite unfamiliar picture of Iron Age life. The people were living in a settlement that we recognise as a town. They were drinking wine, they were using olive oil, dill and coriander in their cooking. It's a sophisticated urban way of living that we don't expect to find in prehistoric Britain.
No medieval or modern town was ever built over Caliva, which gives the archaeologists an unusually clear opportunity to look at interaction between the Iron Age and Roman layers. They're uncovering tantalising evidence that suggests Caliva may have witnessed conflict between Romans and Britons. Professor Mike Fulford runs the excavations here. He's taking me into the early layers of the Roman town. Roman records tell us that after invasion, the British chief Caratacus took them on at the famous Battle of Medway. It's the discovery of coins that may connect Caratacus to Caliva.
We have some examples here. These tiny
Oh, aren't they lovely?
coins.
Can I pick them up?
Yeah.
Oh, they've got little eagles on.
Yep.
Are they eagles?
Yes, eagles on the reverse.
Those are gorgeous. Are they silver?
And they're silver.
Cara.
The inscription reads Cara, thought to stand for Caratacus. Archaeologists use coins to plot the territories of Iron Age chiefs, and many of these coins have been found within a 25-mile radius of Caliva.
It's pretty suggestive that this was Caratacus' stronghold, and it was one of the wealthiest places, a place to be where you get your tax, your tribute, and exercise your power.
If Caratacus was using Caliva as a stronghold, the Romans may have been keen to throw him out and to stamp their authority on the town. In the early Roman streets, the team is now finding metal artefacts that indicate a possible Roman military occupation.
This emerged last week.
It's a little point.
Little catapult bolt. You can see...
That looks vicious.
It is vicious, and you can see the socketing at the end here, so the wooden shaft going in there.
Yeah.
And that would have been fired by a Roman ballista, catapult device, so with a considerable range.
Previously, they uncovered traces of what might have been a military building. And there's more metal.
here is a beautifully preserved belt fitting.
Is it part of a sword belt fitting?
Yeah, I think something like that, yeah.
Really is definitely military then. It's not a part of normal attire.
Yeah, yes. It joins these other artefacts that we're accumulating that point to a military occupation.
The early years of Roman rule saw sporadic rebellions. The archaeology here indicates that one of these may have reached Cladh. In 60 to 61 AD, the British warrior queen Boudica led her tribe in a great revolt against the Romans. In layers dating to this period, the team have found signs of burning and destruction.
Just here down in front of us, you've got this amazing smash, at least one, possibly two large jars that have been broken. You can see the rim.
Oh, here.
Yeah. More rim to your left. And it's part of the debris of the destruction.
Cladh is likely to have been a newly Romanised town, a potential target for Boudica. The evidence from the burnt layer suggests that the town lay abandoned for up to 20 years around the time of her revolt.
It's a remarkable period of history, isn't it?
And
I mean, this
yes,
must have been terrible. It must have been a terrible time
you've
for the people of
lost
Cladh.
everything. Lost everything. And, you know, there's no insurance. You just have to start again.
When you say it like that and you say there was no insurance, you suddenly think, imagine having a house fire and not having insurance.
Yeah.
Everything's gone.
Everything's gone.
The Romans defeated Boudica's rebellion. For nearly 400 years, their rule extended over much of Britain. The symbols of their empire were stamped across this land.
This is Roman Cladh's amphitheatre. It lies just outside the town walls. There is no more powerful a symbol of Roman culture in Britain, but in fact, this was built on the alignment of the old Iron Age town.
This year's archaeology has given us a deeper insight into the sophistication and complexity of the ages of bronze and iron. The Cladh Hallan mummies remind us our Bronze Age ancestors' beliefs were just as complex as ours. And the ancient timber structures of East Anglia allow us to explore the magic of metal and water.
The Romans brought us writing, but written history only tells part of the story. Archaeology not only fills in the gaps, it paints a much more complex picture of our past and connects us with the lives of ordinary people. And so, the digging continues.